as I'm a special education teacher, so I've been in different classrooms with lots of different needs in them related to many different skills, reading being one of them. But I think one of the things I hope to be able to bring to this tonight is a little bit of that classroom experience and some of the things to know about how reading works in schools.
Thanks for having me. I'm Alicia Saba, and I'm a speech language pathologist. I've been in Paris for about 20 years, and I have my own private practice. And I've gone into schools and homes and worked in medical centers and settings, pardon me. And right now, I have many children on my caseload with reading and writing difficulties, particularly dyslexia. So it's a great topic to discuss this evening, and a very needed one, I think.
I am an educational therapist. That title is also like a learning specialist, but I do work a lot with the psychological and emotional aspects of learning and how a child and perhaps a family might be blocked in ways that keep them from learning. I also am a dyslexia specialist. I am still actually in training. I have a mentor. I will accumulate all of my face-to-face hours and sit for the test that the Center for Effective Reading Instruction puts out in about a year. And that will give me the highest certification that they offer in the US for reading teachers. So I'm really pleased to be able to bring that to Paris and share it with our community.
Hi, so I'm Hazel Roux. I started my journey into being a learning specialist about 8 years ago. I did a master's in education in social emotional behavioral difficulties. And since then, I've not stopped learning and working with individual children who have learning difficulties. So I did a postgraduate certificate in special educational needs, and that comprised education evaluations and dyslexia intervention. And I'm currently doing a master's conversion course in psychology, and I'm finishing the education evaluations with access arrangements course, which should be done in the next couple of months. And I work with children individually, and I do education evaluations, and like Dénielle and the others, there's a lot of crossover with the reading skills, dyslexia, and the social emotional side.
Reading nightly with children, I always tell my parents they need to be reading, even if for 5 minutes every night. They should keep a sight word list. That means any words that they don't know in those books, or they can talk about them, or maybe their sight word list from school. Another practice would be rhyming and segmenting words. So I find children with reading difficulties have trouble rhyming, which you've probably all heard about. And it's not so easy. So you start up slow, or you get lots of books that have rhyming. I love Dr. Seuss for that reason. And we talk about segmenting sounds, like, can I break words apart? Can I build them together? Can I switch some of the sounds and then I have a new word? Or what would it be if I put the at the end of the word, it changes that, or I change my vowel sound. I say to take turns with children reading aloud to help them in the beginning. So when you're reading it nightly with children, I say, okay, maybe you read a page out loud. It depends on what reading level that they're at, or they can read a sentence, or they can read a few words, and then try to see if they can find words on the page that you're reading together. So if it's a pronoun, or if it's a noun, try to see if they can recognize it and spot it. Then I look more about the discourse part of reading, and finding the main ideas, and identifying characters, and answering WH questions: who, what, when, where, how, why, which, this kind of thing, and see if they can do it. So we're building our knowledge and understanding about what we're reading, and then predicting and making inferences. And this is more of probably narrative training, but it's important that they can say, what's going to happen next, do you think, before we turn the page? Or we turn the page and say, hey, now what just happened? And then at the end of the book, we say, let's try to summarize what we read about tonight. What was your favorite part, and what was your least favorite part? And now, what happened first? What happened second? What happened at the end? And so that's just some of the ideas that I have for answering your first question.
Make sure that the children, your child, knows the names of the letters of the alphabet and the sequence of them. Absolutely. This is rapid letter naming is something that is a predictor of future reading success. So get out those plastic letters, sequence them. You can even just play a bingo game. There's lots of letter games you could play, but to add to everything that Alicia said, I would definitely make sure that the child knows, and you can just do the capital letters. That's enough of a base where they're able to connect the lowercase and then eventually script.
Say to take every opportunity as a reading opportunity. So when you're out with the child, road signs, menus, just connecting anything in the house, just really so they understand reading is everywhere, and so you're taking every opportunity to do it. Sometimes I know, obviously ideal is the parents reading every night. Sometimes I know some parents are frazzled, tired, working a lot, working away. So any opportunity of anybody who might be looking after the children to read with them, take it in turns as well. They're doing exactly the same as Alicia, but if the parents can't do it, to have anybody reading with them as well, I think is advantageous. And maybe as they're getting older, for children who might struggle, having the book with an audio book as well, so they're seeing the sound and seeing the words as well, to help, particularly for somebody who might struggle a bit. So that's just the things I would possibly add.
I would take it back one step and talk about play. I think that when we're talking about healthy reading practices, we naturally need all of the elements that make someone capable of reading. And when you zoom out a little bit further too, especially very young children, one of the things that they need is symbolic play. So the idea that when I pick up a block and say hello, or more this, I guess nowadays, hello, that children are using that as a symbol to represent a phone. So the play that they're doing holds meaning, and that they're using this to stand in for something, which eventually is what letters do, right? The word cat doesn't look like a cat, but it stands in for cat. So for children to have plenty of opportunities for symbolic play, rich play, meaningful play, where they're using these different symbols, right? I wrap up a blanket and I go like this. I have a baby, it's standing in for a baby. And these things are things that then connect to the ability to be able to recognize letters and numbers as symbols, anything as symbols, right? That there's a euro sign that stands in for money, where our world is symbols. So for children to have this opportunity for rich play, lots of play, I'm a big advocate of young children playing, that this is something that they then use later on. So this is not wasted time by any means. It's not useless time. And then, as my colleagues have already shared, opportunities to play with words, with letters, that we're playing games. And these could be things, as a teacher, you sometimes use in between times as well. When you're going somewhere, you're trying to get everyone to go somewhere, you're trying to spend a minute while you're waiting for something to start. And I would always play a game with students that they loved, where I'd give them a word and I'd take a part of it away and ask them what was left with it. So we're getting into phonemic awareness, but in a really playful way. And I start with them the idea of like, what's hairbrush without hair? And then they have to say brush, and they would love this game. And it was like finding ways to then come up with words. And as they got better at it, I could then use a word, take away one of the sounds of it, and they would be able to figure it out. But it's playing with sound. It's having those skills first. And I think the idea of play is sometimes something that we don't value enough. And I guess that's something that I think is really important for people to know, that it plays into healthy reading.
They are not able to remember the names of letters, or they're not able to put the phoneme with the grapheme. Handwriting is sometimes also spelling this, the made up spelling, and I don't think that's the right term, but invented spelling is way off. I think a lack of the phonemic awareness would be the first warning sign for me if a child wasn't able to rhyme, not able to segment a word or reblend them back, as Alicia said. Then if a child has taught themselves how to sight read, which can happen, they'll be able to do that up till about third grade. And then they need, once they get into more multisyllabic words, it's going to be hard for them. So then the morphology comes in. So if I was in a classroom, or if a parent came to me and the child was not able to really break the word into syllables, I would take that as a sign of somebody who needed more instruction in reading. Fluency is huge. If a person cannot read automatically with ease, recognizing the words, the brain is working too hard at decoding, and it will not be able to comprehend what's going on. This is a huge thing that I've seen this a couple times with kids, that they're working so hard to decode and there's no fluency. Fluency leads to good comprehension. So I think now I'm saying that's maybe a little older, but even it could be in third grade. So that is really a big warning sign if the kid is not is struggling with reading. There's something that I learned in my training, that they have discovered that backwards B's and P's, letter reversals are actually not a sign of dyslexia. That Mr. Orton said. I don't remember the actual the research behind it. I'm sorry, but I was quite surprised about that. That's just a sequencing thing. And sequencing. But if a child is not able to retrieve information, or they're not able to hold sounds in their orthographic memory, that's a really, really big sign that there's some kind of reading struggle going on.
I think some behavioral signs in a class of a child who might be struggling but doesn't want to show it would be a child who avoids reading out loud, but they might have a book and they're kind of mimicking reading it, but they're actually not, and they're picking up what the story is from people around them, but they kind of avoid to read out loud. And children do that, and they try to distract and might mess about. So that's like a sign of a child maybe in a class who's struggling but doesn't want to let anybody know. And then there's similar to Dénielle about the decoding and the comprehension. So there's obviously everyone's got different styles, and some people have co-occurring difficulties as well, which can make things complicated. So you can have a child who decodes, who looks as though they read fluently. I think that's what you were saying, Dénielle, but they're not understanding what they're saying. And then you might have children who their comprehension is quite high, certainly for verbal comprehension, but they have difficulty reading the words. And those are, I think, typically the dyslexic ones. There's lots of different profiles, but I think behaviorally is a good sign if you haven't looked into the specifics of how they're the phonemic and the syllables. Those are some signs, I would say.
We don't have to wait for children to fail before we're giving them more support. And I think that's one big area that reading intervention is really trying to work on. And I think it's an important thing for parents to know, for teachers to know, that we don't need to wait until they can't read to be able to support them better. So knowing that phonemic awareness, that being able to break words into parts is an important piece. And we can see when students are struggling to do that. It's not to say they're going to be diagnosed with a reading disability later on, but it does show us that if they're struggling right then, they need more support right then with that skill. We don't need to wait longer for that. But I think that some of the other common markers, as Rachel was saying, to add on to her point about behavior, I think too, when you see children guessing a lot, when you're seeing children using context clues so much that they're, not able to recognize the difference between two common words, or two similar words rather, I think that can be a big sign of students that are struggling. And I think when you see children losing interest, losing confidence, saying they can't read, saying they don't know how to read, they don't want to read, they're going to do anything to avoid the reading activity in general, is usually a big sign that there's a deeper issue. There's some struggling happening there.
I think if you if a child is lacking confidence, and I see that often when parents fill out questionnaires for me, they say their child is hesitant to read. They don't like reading. They don't want to go to school. They're not getting good grades. I think those are signs. If he doesn't want to, the child doesn't want to sit down and read with the parent. Definitely oral reading fluency is one of the number one signs. When they make a pause or repeat a word, and they're not fluent in how they read. If they read, if their prosody is not right when they're reading. I'm not talking about the first time when we read and we're decoding, but after a while, they're not reading with this correct expression that sounds like it's not like robotic reading. That's a trigger of say, hey, maybe something's not right. The other thing I think is possibly repeated ear infections. I always look at that when I see, because I say, maybe is a child not hearing? And so then that's one thing to list. I say, well, we need to get that hearing checked out.
Just say whoever noticed first, bring it up with the other person, so the school or the parent, and then try to implement first more into the quality teaching in the school. If that doesn't seem to work, then maybe get an intervention which is focused across a certain amount of time. And then if that still doesn't seem to help, then it might be going to the next stage of getting more specialist help and long-term help.
Yeah, I think it's this is where good school communication is really important, and for families to feel comfortable going into schools and asking questions. And I think that it's tricky when you don't know the questions to ask. And so as a parent, to know that you can ask questions about what the reading program is like at the school. You can ask questions about how students are monitored with their reading progress. Again, these are skills that students slowly start acquiring, through preschool and maternelle into CP, into elementary school. So we don't need to wait until elementary school to find this out. I mean, if you look at the French curriculum, this is, building blocks are being put in place all along maternelle. And you can identify, as we've said already, these skills early on. So we know when there's someone that's struggling already. And I think parents should know that they can ask about how schools are tracking this information. Schools should be screening students for reading skills, and they should be using a standardized screener that's normed on a community that's similar to the community of the school. And this is where it gets challenging, because sometimes schools put in place screening measures that are not standardized screening measures. The schools decided these are the norms that we're going to put in place here, but it's not actually normed on any particular group. So I think it's challenging when you have schools that might come to a parent and say, there's no issue, when the parent is actually saying there is something happening here. And that's when I would start to ask about what kind of screening they're using, how they're measuring, how progress monitoring is being determined. So if we screen the students as they're coming into, for example, grande section, how are we keeping track of students through the year? Are we seeing progress continue to build? Are students plateauing, or is there nothing to report? So I think parents should know that they can ask those kinds of questions, because schools should have that information and be ready to share that with you. And I think, as I said before, it's important to know that when we do recognize something, that we can put in place interventions that help students straight away. We're not saying students are going to be shunted into a different track where they're going to be labeled and diagnosed immediately. We're saying that students need intensive intervention at that moment around this particular skill so that they can continue to progress. We know research shows that if you wait until 4th grade, for example, to get support, you have 4 times longer to get that skill built. So if we just remove the stigma about saying, actually, this child needs intensive support for this amount of time, we're going to remove the obstacle of it being an issue for them later on. So I think it's also part of it is around schools building the culture of saying, we are good at identifying what issues there are. We're comfortable giving interventions that are needed, and parents can know about that. So I think for parents to know that they are right to ask questions, to know that they can look to the school to understand what exactly is happening within the school and what types of programs are being used.
So how and when parents should seek the support is when they see that list that we just discussed of markers indicating that there could be a problem. And I think, yes, absolutely, early intervention is the key. Don't wait, and you absolutely have a right to get in, to make an appointment with that teacher. If you know your child has already been diagnosed with a learning disability, then it is your responsibility as a parent to get in there as fast as you can and make appointments with if it's in a monolingual school or if it's a bilingual school, both of those teachers. If it's in junior high school and college, then make appointments with all of those teachers and talk about the child's learning patterns. And the other thing, one of the other markers I thought, if you feel that your child isn't developing like their sibling, if you have, let's say, an older sibling and an older child, and you're saying, my second child isn't developing like the first one, he didn't catch on to reading, or he's not understanding his graphemes and his phonemes, and he's not able to match and things like, yes, then I think that's another thing to watch out for. I'm not saying that we're all alike, and certainly we don't all develop at the same rate, even within families, but those tend to be good indicators of maybe we just need to keep a little extra eye on him or spend a little more time.
So yes, I think universal screeners should definitely be used in schools. In some states in the US, they're using universal screeners for kindergartners, and the ones that are showing at-risk characteristics, they intervene immediately with phonemic awareness, and the rates of reading issues have dropped dramatically. I have one colleague friend, and her mom is a principal, I think it's Boston, and in her school, the reading intervention needs are very much lower since they started the universal screening. So I think that parents really need to really watch their child's reading, because teaching is a craft. Teaching reading is a craft. It's a science, actually. And we come out of teacher school with a basic understanding of how to teach reading. And many times kids can escape out of our knowledge base because we don't really know enough. And I'm talking about me also when I was a teacher. I actually got into reading specialty because I was an English as another language teacher in Harlem, New York. And the kids who came to me spoke English fine, just like a native speaker, but they couldn't read. And I didn't know how to teach reading. I didn't know enough about teaching reading with my teacher training. So I went to Teachers College, Columbia University, and that's when I started my venture, this path I've been on of teaching reading. So I think parents really, really have to watch their kids in the reading. And yes, they need to be concerned about it, because I work with families whose children have slipped through the cracks and have been passed on by teachers. And the teachers just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And I think also we as teachers, we work so hard and we give so much to our craft that sometimes we get defensive and we don't want to say that we don't know what we don't know. And this really can hurt a kid.
I'll answer the first part and then I'll let my colleagues answer the second part. I think when we should be looking for an evaluation is when we follow that progress monitoring. Like, we've done the universal screening, everyone in the whole place has been screened. We're doing progress monitoring. And when we've done potentially some intensive interventions in the school, whether there's been direct teaching in the school around a specific skill set that's gone on for long enough, and we've hit another point in the year when we're doing more progress monitoring and we haven't seen progress, this is when I think we need to start looking at what else is happening. And at this point, is it beyond what the school is able to provide support in? So I think this is part of why the progress monitoring is so important within the schools, is because these are the moments we're going to catch what's really happening for somebody. And because there's so much happening in schools, there's so many different things teachers are measuring, having these moments in the year to say, we do consistent progress monitoring. And maybe schools have a program like a response to intervention program, an RTI program, where students are moving into intensive supports for a short period of time, and then back out of those intensive supports again when their progress monitoring is showing that they've reached a level of success. Some students might come back in. I worked in a school where that was the model, and there was a lot of moving in and out of program. There was a lot of support, intensively short term. They come out, but they always had data to back it up. And so I think when you move, you need to have that data. You need to have that clear opportunity for a student to have gotten support within the school, with parents, kind of that intensive focus. And if we're not seeing progress after, and I'm not talking a long period of time, I'm talking like, a quarter of the year, a half of the year has gone by, when we're hitting second and third progress monitoring moments and we're still not seeing progress, that's when I would recommend looking outside for an evaluation.
So I would say, just to reiterate, do not wait. If you think your child or your cousin or your cousin's child or whatever, if you're a teacher, if your student has a problem, don't wait. The earlier, the better to intervene is optimal. I would say you can get a referral. Normally in the US, we would refer to reading specialists if we're talking about reading literacy issues. And they are in our schools, but here in France, as you know, it's a medical model. And so our specialists are not always in schools. They are more in bilingual schools or in Anglophone schools, but not in our typical French schools. So absolutely refer them for a psychoeducational evaluation or an educational evaluation, speech language evaluation. We do have reading specialists here that can evaluate children. And absolutely, I can't stress this enough, get the hearing and the vision tested as well.
Well, speech language therapists here do a great job of doing evaluations. I think looking for a reading teacher is a good way to do evaluations. Schools usually have their own process for evaluations too, that and pass them on. I think that there's certain parts of the evaluations that psychologists do that could be administered without giving the whole battery of, the cognitive processes could happen. And also, I really like what Alicia is saying about the hearing. Yeah, definitely, the hearing is huge, especially if there are a lot of ear infections and when the child was growing up.
And don't ask for, don't ask for a hearing screening. Like when you go to the audiological evaluation, you want to ask for a full audiological evaluation, because sometimes the physicians here, the otolaryngologists, just do certain frequencies and they don't run the whole gamut. But you need something that if you want reimbursement or if you are making a dossier at MDPH, then you need something official, right? We need professionals that can have their evaluations translated and accepted through the MDPH.
I'd just reiterate the audio as well, particularly audio processing. So not just if the ears are they're working left and right, but how it's processing, because some children have problem understand that they hear okay, but the process of understanding what's being said is very difficult. So that can have a big effect. And the visual, how the eyes are working together, because I think when they check the eyes, they check them individually and say, oh, their vision's perfect. But then the child, sometimes you see a child is kind of sat like this, and actually because the eyes are working well together, or the convergence, so that needs further, and that's a really good thing to check as well. So I've got tests because I'm registered with the British Psychological Society for testing, and I'm getting the assessment done at the moment. And so the tests that I have, which can help with readings, are the Wyatt 3. So there's a number of tests on there, including reading fluency, word spelling, and comprehension. So those could be used to have an indication of difficulties a child's having. I also have CTOP 2, and that's a really good test because that does phonological, I think, fluency and memory. And so that's a really good one, which breaks down the difficulties a child's having. And because they're listening to the sounds and breaking the sounds up, like Jessica was saying, the game she plays. So it really picks on that. And that works as well with children who aren't necessarily English mother tongue, because they're listening to, can they hear the sounds? Can they break the sounds up? So that could be quite useful. That's 2. I've got some other tests as well, but those are 2 really good ones which can help identify the specific problems the children are having. I know we've talked a lot about beginner readers as well, and I thought sometimes children, the difficulties become a parent in secondary school. And one thing I've noticed living here, because it's international, so we have the standardized test, but we have to use it with caution, because the standardized, I don't know if you've had the test standardized for international, but often it's American or English, the group of people. So we always have to be a bit careful with that, because often we see children who might have a German mum and a Russian father, and they've lived in Hong Kong, and now they've come over to France and they're in a full English system or a mixed system. So sometimes children might seem to have a learning difficulty or a dyslexia, but actually they might just have had inconsistent kind of pathway to where they are now. And that's, so it's quite tricky defining what it is. And then they haven't in their mother tongue had an education either. So it's like a bit of detective work, trying to work out with the parents, with the school, with the child. Sometimes children in secondary school who've been to other systems and other countries, sometimes their reading's okay, their kind of comprehension's okay, but sometimes it's their academic language which is missing. So they're fluent speaking colloquially with their friends, or they can watch a film. But when it gets to, say, reading and writing work, sometimes there's a bit of a gap with the academic language. And so that would be within the school, I would say, or with trying to reinforce academic listening and language. That's another area, I would say, rather than just beginning to speak. But it's easy to, it's once you've worked out what to do or how, or what the problem is, then it's relatively easy to kind of try and give them more vocabulary to then help with the reading and the sounds in English, because we're talking about English here. So for children who don't have English speaking parents, it's really difficult, because they may only have English at school and not at home and not in the country. So it's really, so the parents for that need to find, how can we find activities or other ways for the children to be immersed in more English, as well as speaking the other languages, which are really useful too.
Once again, going back to early intervention, phonemic awareness building, there are a lot of good books out there. The one I use is called Equipped for Reading Success by, I can't remember anything right now. If you contact me, I can give you the name, but it's Equipped for Reading Success. That has a lot of phonological awareness activities in it. Really, schools should have teachers, one teacher who's trained as a reading teacher or a speech language pathologist, just to acknowledge, the skill base there. But if a child's really struggling, really need to get it quick and early, because it just builds into all of the complexities of, I can't read, I'm stupid, everything that we see as, as educators. And it's really a shame, but definitely the kind of reading program that should be avoided is one where you pull from this resource and that resource and another resource and just kind of put them all together. It's not structured, it's not sequential, it's just kind of hit or miss. It should be definitely multisensory, and it should hit all of the language skills. Reading informs spelling, and spelling informs reading. Those two language skills must go together.
I guess in the younger, or even younger grades, if they can have little breakout groups with children who might be struggling to work on a program, is really useful. I know in the US, I know I've talked about this with Alicia, and I've got a couple of children who've had this previously. I'm not trained in it, but it's Autumn Gillingham, it's Wilson, which is multisensory and is progressive, and it works on all the elements. And I've worked with a couple of children who've worked on what they had before, and it's really impactful them on all the skills they need. And for older children as well, because I work with a lot of older children, so it's really useful for children who haven't been picked up earlier on. And so I think if there's any parents who've got older children, although it might be difficult, it says get everything early, even if they haven't been got early, there's still hope. I mean, even if you're an adult, you can still learn to read. It's not all like desperate, oh my God, I've missed that critical period. It might be a sense period. It's still possible to pick up those skills with good direction and practice. That I was trained in something in the UK, which was a short intervention. That's kind of like for when it's beyond the class, but maybe not a permanent difficulty, which was called Boosting for Reading. And I did for secondary, but it's for primary as well. And this kind of thing works quite well. So it's like over 10 weeks. So you measure before, you measure at the end. And this was 3 times a week. I think it's 10 or 15 minutes of direct instruction of reading and what the difficulties are. And then, but after the 10 weeks, you should see evidence to show that you would have a progress. And if there's not an improvement, then that would mean that you need some other type of intervention, because your problem is maybe more of a severe dyslexia, which is, you need a different type of intervention. So I think it depends it's really interesting to look at what do the schools have in place, and are they good, and how do they use it, and who uses it, who's the person who's teaching that intervention to the kids. That could be quite important as well. What did I write something else? I can't remember. But I would say there's always something that can be done. So if anybody's listening and they've got an older child, not to panic.
Having schools have a clear model of how they're monitoring progress, as we've said, having schools have a clear system for how they move students in and out of support, having people understand that we're not labeling students for the rest of time as having a reading disability or learning disability, that we're trying to get students the intensive support that they need while they need it. So having a system that people are keeping that data regularly so that we can get students the support they need. And like it was already said, to make sure that we're using systems that are, research-backed systems, that we have systems that are programs that are thorough enough, that are also looking at all the different elements of reading. When we talked already about the phonics, which is different than phonemic awareness. We have the vocabulary, you have reading comprehension, you have fluency. And I think one of the things we have to be clear about is what's your goal? And you got to be clear about your goal, right? And if we're going to focus on one specific part of your goal, what is it, and how are those intensive interventions linked to building that goal? We want to build overall good readers. Yes. Do we have splinter skills where a student might have a high this and a low that? Is the whole thing low? What are we focusing on exactly? I think the idea that we're working on reading is like, well, but how? With what? How are we measuring that success? And I think that there's really clear ways that it can do that are all backed by research. And whenever I'm in a school, I always want to see a research supported system and something that can help those students move in and out as they need. And if you are lucky enough to have that specialist support in the school, this is the ideal, is having that specialist, that therapist, that support in the school, because they're the person who's also going to be able to communicate with teachers about what that should look like. How do we focus in on a specific goal? Which specific intervention are we going to use, and we're going to measure the success of? So that's what you really want to see in a school, to make sure that students are getting what they need.
It's also to put the child at the forefront of it and to remember their self-esteem and motivation. So regardless of how big their difficulty is well to be quite to just deal with it without kind of making it seem like a big problem for the teacher and the child and the other children. It's just something we're working on. I think that's particularly for older children as well. I think that's quite important.
I would agree with that. And I would just go off you, Rachel, and say, I think when schools have a culture where they can say people are moving in and out of support, we're going in and out, that there's not the regular room and the resource room. We're in and out. You're going to switch to this group. We tracked more data last week. This is where the groups are now. We're dynamic. We're switching these groups. You're not forever in the high group, forever in the low group. And I think when you build a school culture that says we listen, we follow, we use this information, we're moving as we need to, students see that and they know, I'm going to get the help I need. I didn't need it last week. I need it this week. I probably won't need it next week, but I can grow, I can learn. And we give them that growth mindset right there. And I think that's so much of what it is about, and that confidence, like you say.
Yeah, I agree. And also I'll add is to give the teachers also the growth mindset that they are capable of giving that help to that child in the class. They don't have to, I think some teachers, they actually do a really good job, but they lack confidence and think, oh, that child's dyslexic, I need to put them onto somebody else. And actually they've actually got the skills to deal with it, but they just think, oh, I haven't done dyslexia, I haven't done this, so I don't know. So they might not know everything, but actually they've got a lot of knowledge that they can help. And I think it's important as well to give that confidence to the teachers as well, that if they've got a child, they don't have to put them somewhere else and let somebody else deal with it. It's part of the whole learning.
So one thing from a therapist side of life, I would say, I talk to teachers about this all the time. Grade children's content. Don't grade their spelling. See if you can empower that child by looking at what they're saying and how they're saying, but not the spelling. I get this a lot. So if you're going to do dictate, I think dictate is okay. I think the child to participate in that activity, but just don't grade that dictate. We don't want to do anything to keep, reinforcing the negativity in that child. We want them to feel success and to empower them and to not be afraid to make mistakes. Reduce the homework load, I would say, is a big one for these types of children that are having difficulties. Instead of giving 4 exercises, give 2, and make that be okay. And make it, say, if the adult has to help the child at home, that the adult can write on there, dictated by the adult. So the child, dictated by the child, and the adult has written the homework. Maybe they're too tired. These school days are really super long on these children. So those children with learning difficulties and disabilities are super exhausted when they get home, because they've had to spend a lot of time processing all this information and sound and this kind of thing. Re-auditorize directions to students. So just repeat your information and see if the child can then repeat it to you to make sure they've understood what the task expectation is in your classroom. We need to reduce distractions. So maybe plan a quiet corner where a child who has a sensory overload or who needs a little moment to regain composure can go to. Els did a presentation about this, well, not about this topic, but she had a fabulous thing that she showed us, where these tents that she made. And I just love that. And I think, man, if she could get into classrooms and just make a little tent corner, that would just be awesome for teachers. Teach vocabulary. Teach both expressive and receptive vocabulary. We've got to build those vocabulary skills for those weak readers. You could teach thinking skills, such as like that SQ3R, you scan, you question, you read, revise, review, or those KWHL charts, so you talk about what you already know and what you will learn and how you will do it. And then you summarize and what did you learn, this kind of thing. This helps build efficiency in learning, but also retention of what you've learned. Summarize, teach reciprocal teaching. So you have somebody who's a questioner, and this is where you work in your small groups of learners, like Jessica was talking about. So somebody is the summarizer, somebody is the predictor, somebody is the clarifier. And they each have different roles. They've got to come up with the questions for next week of what's going to happen in the story. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Speed it up. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, wait, I got 2 more. Students should be directly taught comprehension skills. So using something like story grammar marker or the plot mountain, those are other techniques that teachers can actually use in their classroom. And teach children about practicing reading. This is a strategy I use, and I'm sure, Rachel, you know about this. Read something 3 times. And if it's a sentence, read it 3 times. The first time you're reading to decode. The second time you're reading for comprehension. And the third time you're reading, it's for speed. And use audiobooks. So if you have a child, even a late reader or an older person, even for these multilingual learners where English or whatever language you're working in isn't their mother tongue or their language at home or their parents' language, use audiobooks. so the child can then follow along. Remember those old, turn the page as you hear the ding as you go. Well, we've got lots of audio resources now, and there are lots of resources online.
I guess it's pretty just common sense, is if the needs aren't being met or aren't able to be met within the school, then you go privately. I guess that would be my quick answer.
When you haven't seen progress, if you've seen a deteriorating state of confidence, or again, that reluctance, that avoidance of reading, I think that's and you've been with the school, you've been in contact with the school, you know what the teachers are doing, and you still are not seeing progress, that's when I would go privately.
Those 2 points, Jesse, and I would say, if the school cannot provide support in any of those child's other languages, I definitely get them reading support. So they don't just need help in one language, it's their academic language, which ties into what Rachel said before, their emotional language, or if you can get therapy in all of their languages, get therapy in those languages too. Because why? Children are going to move to other countries, or they have to communicate or be able to read their family's histories or function in those languages. That's not always feasible, but we need to recommend that to parents.
I would ask a lot of questions if I was a parent. How is progress being measured, and show me. I would also ask about, I would ask a lot of in-depth questions about the instruction, the person who's providing the instruction, and yeah, but the progress is definitely, how are you measuring the progress? Brownie, I just do want to add, though, that I think parents maybe sometimes should go to an outside source to get the child, because that's always a reassurance to know actually where the child is, separate from what the school is saying. Just to get some more information. The parents might want to get more information on their child,